And we are live. Hey guys, this is Ruben from Dubb's podcast, Connection Loop. And today we're going to talk about a subject matter that I don't know much about. I have to admit, right now we have an expert, in fact, on this topic, which is a paid newsletter. Just full disclosure here, I've never tried to do this. I've never charged for a newsletter to be a part of one. And I've also never paid for one. So I've never organized it and never been a customer for this. So I'm all ears. I'm a student. Simon, if you could please first start with just a bio about yourself, like how you got here, what you're up to.
Sure. Hey, I'm Simon Owens. I got my start in journalism. My first job out of college was as a newspaper journalist at a print publication. Was later an editor at U.S. News and World Report. But I eventually went over to kind of the marketing and PR side, helping a lot of large companies ranging from Google to Nike to Intel to basically create kind of journalistic content and incorporate that into their content marketing. But I'm also just really kind of fascinated with the business of content, how people create content, spread it, monetize it. And so I've been publishing both a regular newsletter on Substack for several years, and then also a podcast called The Business of Content, where I have on, the top practitioners everywhere from the New York Times to YouTube to, wherever, huge media personalities. I have them on the podcast and really just kind of grill them about their secrets about how they built their careers in online content. So that's kind of what I've been doing on a regular basis. And then about 6 months ago, I launched a paid component of my newsletter where people who pay to subscribe for roughly $10 a month, they get extra articles where I do kind of these what I call case study interviews, where I find a media practitioner who has like a lot of insights to share. And I basically grill them for an hour and try to get every single tiny insight that they can offer about how they grew their business, and paying subscribers get access to that.
So this is a tremendous journey, because it's really, I think, in my opinion, the evolution of someone, in traditional media that is now broken out and figured out a very entrepreneurial way to provide a ton of value, provide high value content, but then also monetize it and make the whole thing kind of make economic sense. So that's intriguing to me. What would you say the sort of the biggest catalyst point for you was when you realized that you needed to start to have, your free content, but then also, paid content?
Yeah, so the free content, it always made money, but indirectly, in that it was like a client lead generator. So I don't do any kind of cold pitching for my content consulting at all. All the leads I get for new clients are completely warm leads, either from people who I've worked with in the past recommending me, or the vast majority of them are people who subscribe to my newsletter or podcast. They think I'm really smart on this stuff, and they eventually had a need in which they reached out to me. But the problem is it wasn't really a scalable business. Because you can only charge so much per hour and you can only work so many hours per week. So every time I would get a lot of client work, it gave me less time to work on my newsletter and podcast, which were actually scalable. But because they weren't generating any direct revenue, I couldn't scale the revenue at the same pace that I was scaling the audience. So the catalyst came this February, and it was just kind of like a perfect storm of basically the COVID pandemic happening. I don't know, it just felt like this time where there was like a lot of economic disruption. I saw a lot of publishers really pushing kind of subscription messaging, saying, hey, this is the best time to support journalism. And I just made a go for it. I actually had, a pretty huge client who was tossing me regular work. And I actually they reached out to me for a new project. And I said, I really can't take anything on right now because this is what I want to focus on for the foreseeable future. So I've been going at it since then.
That's intriguing, man. I'm so grateful that you shared that. One of the things that I recently noticed a lot more of was that some of the publications, I've noticed this on the LA Times, I've noticed this on, I think, was it the Wall Street Journal? I think it was the Wall Street Journal, where they are just getting much more aggressive when it comes to pay gates, and you see an article on social media, you click on it, and then you can't even read it. I mean, you're lucky if you can even see the headline, But bam, right in your face on your mobile, there's a pay gate that says subscribe now in order to see content like this. And it's a little jarring because, you know, there's like such two massively different schools of thought when it comes to content. On one side, obviously, is that content is democratized and it's free, and the way that money is made is through back end things that maybe we don't need to even think about. I mean, obviously we do because we watch those ads, but we don't have to put a credit card in. And then the other school of thought is that, well, no. We need to figure out ways to monetize content. You know, Medium has this now with a premium subscription. You know, as I mentioned, some of the publications. Where's the future of this? You know, with these two kind of opposing schools of thought. What does this look like in 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, especially now with COVID and advertising rates cratering, you're seeing publishers double down on paid content. As you kind of pointed to two different models. The LA Times, I think they have like a metered paywall that where the paywall kicks in after 3 visits or reading 3 articles. The Wall Street Journal has a much harder paywall where the vast majority of its content you can't access at all, even if you're landing on it the first time. You're going to just see a lot more publishers kind of experimenting with this because they have to, because they just lost the advertising game to, you know, much bigger players like Facebook and Google. I think a lot of them are up for a rude awakening. Like the New York Times had so much success with its paywall that I think a lot of other publishers thought they just needed to roll out a paywall and it would work. And in the cases of like the LA Times, the New York Times has more paying subscribers in California than the LA Times has paying subscribers in California, which is a pretty amazing fact when you think about it, considering California is the LA Times home turf, and they should be winning that war, and they're just not. They're still continuing to struggle. And I think a lot of these publishers, you ask, you know, 5 years from now, what is this going to look like? They're going to have to be experimenting like crazy, figuring out what should go in front of the paywall, kind of like what you were hinting at, like what should be democratized free content and what are users worth paying for. And is that thing that they're worth paying for, is it content? Is it like just to access the articles, or is it like little extra freebies? You know, I had a recent guest on my podcast. I don't think the episode has gone live yet. It's going to go live in a few weeks. But he is a sports writer for a newspaper in Ohio. He doesn't put any of his content behind a paywall, but he uses this text messaging service called Subtext. And if the listeners to his podcast want to ask him questions that he then reads out on his podcast and then answers, they have to subscribe for $4 a month. And that gives them a 2-way texting service with him where they can send him text messages and he can easily send them back, and creates this kind of collaborative atmosphere. And yet the main product, which is his podcast, remains completely free. So you're going to see a lot of experimenting like that, where some of them, like the Wall Street Journal, are going to put everything behind the paywall, and others are going to create these kind of communities and stuff where they basically unlock the super fans and get them to pay while keeping most of the content for free.
I think that's tremendous, man. I think that is exactly the direction that we need to go in as content creators. And the reason why specifically is that I kind of, not to be a pessimist, because I'm usually not. I'm usually an optimist, sometimes even an over-optimist. But the storm that I see coming, in my humble opinion, is derived from what Google is about to launch, which is forthcoming within just the next couple of months or so, which is their Web Core Vitals, which is going to be a reinvention of the way that they look at content and understand analytics. Because now the vast majority of websites have Google Analytics on them, and they have, most of them, at least those folks that want to monetize, they have some sort of, you know, Google AdSense or some way to kind of put ads on there. So the amount of data that Google is receiving from our content is second to none. So as a result of this, the thing that I'm personally concerned about is that if that article on the LA Times has a paywall on it, and people, the vast majority, let's say 95%, 98% of the people can't actually go spend time on that article on their desktop, on their mobile device, watch the video, that the analytics are going to be terrible. They're going to be horrific for that. Google Analytics is going to say the vast majority of the people that go to this article are not viewing it. The time on site is 3 seconds, and then people bounce, which means that the SEO metrics for those articles are going to get dinged dramatically. Not to mention, once people kind of get wind of this, they're not going to be sharing the articles as much. Like, I would never share an article on a publication if I know that the other person is going to get stuck with some sort of a paywall or a gate. So the thing that I'm most concerned about is that the SEO metrics for those folks that are trying to overly monetize and not think creatively, like what you just presented with subtext, I am concerned that they're going to suffer a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know about the changes that you're describing, but one of the core metrics within the Google algorithm is how quickly someone bounces off the site that they clicked on. So if you click on a search result leading you to LA Times, hit a paywall, and then you immediately click the back button to Google, back to the Google search results, that sends a signal to Google's algorithm that you didn't find what you were looking for. So I'm sure that publishers are already, seeing some effects from that. A lot of publishers have implemented what's called, I think it's called like first click free, which if you're coming in through Google search results, even though there's normally a paywall, you can still access the content. Like, it basically turns the paywall off for Google searches. So, obviously that might be a factor. Although a lot of publishers turned off first click free because people figured out that was a way to get around their paywall. They would just Google the headlines and then click on that, and then they would get to read the article. But yeah, it's definitely a different.
Yeah, hashtag.
Sorry.
I was going to say hashtag incognito window.
Yeah, although, most publishers are actually blocking incognito mode, so you can't get around that way. One other thing kind of related to what you're talking about, I read an interesting article a few weeks back noting that a lot of the highest quality publishers that are like publishing the best information, especially politically and health related right now, are have paywalls, whereas a lot of the low quality news sites, the ones that are publishing so-called fake or false news, especially like COVID virus misinformation and stuff, they're monetized through programmatic ads, and they're kind of built to go viral on places like Facebook and Twitter. So we have this dynamic where fake news is actually able to spread a lot more easily, kind of to your point, than the really high quality news. And I think that's going to create a very corrosive environment for information consumption.
Yeah, well said. So how do we do this as smaller creators? How do we get ourselves into a flow where we can get an entire calendar of high value content? How do we build up our social channels so that we can amass followers, prospects? How do we figure out economic ways to monetize the process, i.e. paid newsletter, i.e. texting services? And how do we do this in a way where we can continue to grow and scale this?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly hard. It's a cutthroat atmosphere out there. Everybody is only one click away, so your competition is virtually limitless. I mean, obviously, the biggest kind of top line piece of advice is consistency. That's one of the, other than just creating high quality content, putting it out on a consistent basis so people get to, learn your brand, to, follow you, all that kind of stuff. That's how you're going to kind of amass the kind of audience that you can then later convert. And it might be subscriptions, it might be ads, but it might be something like what you're doing where you have a paid video product. So this is kind of like a thought leader. I'm guessing that this podcast that we're on right now is a form of thought leadership where it's kind of bringing people in the top of the funnel and then bringing them down to the sales funnel. So thinking along those lines. The other big trend line that we're going to see is just more emphasis on the email inbox as a lot of these big tech platforms rein in their content, put their algorithms so that you have to pay just to access your own followers. The emphasis is going to be just getting the email address, because once you have that person's email address, have access to their inbox, you can do all sorts of interesting marketing things, not just serving them with content, but also drip campaigns and other kinds of marketing things to, slowly work on converting them into paid subscribers. And it's a long hard slog. I mean, I've been doing this for 6 months, the paid version. I'm not making a full-time income yet. I'm on a good trajectory. If you look at the graph, it's, up and to the right, and I'm, growing it every single week, but you need to have that kind of runway to reach it. Like, I think the good rule of thumb now is, it takes at least 2 years worth of high quality content before that content is generating enough direct revenue to where, you're making a full-time salary or whatever.
Wow, that's an interesting metric. Speak to me about that. Where did that come from?
I mean, it's basically based on studies of, full-time creators, especially subscription creators, using platforms like Substack, which is a platform that allows for paid newsletters, or Patreon, a platform that does a little bit of paid newsletters, but is mostly utilized by podcasters and YouTubers and musicians and stuff like that. I've interviewed a lot of them, and a lot of them, they have to have their Patreon or Substack account up for a very long time, where they're just continually having that call to action, directing the listenership back before they reach a kind of critical mass of those. I don't know if you know the 1,000 true fans, that kind of metric of hitting 1,000 people who are willing to pay for your work.
Yeah, I mean, I constantly am surfing this wave because, on one hand, we have a software platform that's our revenue source. That's where we put the vast majority of our time into. But at the same time, people need education. They need to learn. They need to learn on how to communicate and how to use video and how to, use Dubb on LinkedIn and so many different kind of features that we have. So on the other hand, we need to be coaches and trainers. I noticed that we constantly suffer from this thing where, like, should we pay for this? Should we charge for this? Should we not charge for this? On one hand, we have a vehicle, we have a financial vehicle, but on the flip side, this is obviously a big time commitment for us. What would you suggest to folks to kind of figure out how much of their content to give away for free and how much to charge for? How do we determine that balance?
Yeah, I mean, so if you're in terms of like how much content you want to give it for free, I don't have an exact metric, but you should be trying to give as much content away for free because that's kind of the top of your funnel. And you also want to make kind of like your highest quality content. You would think you would want to put the highest quality content behind the paywall, but in reality, you actually want to put it in front of the paywall because that's the content that's most likely to go viral and then to create a bunch of signups, which you can then later convert into paying subscribers or customers in the case of your software product. But I think one thing to think about is how do you make your paid product different from your free product? So this is less relevant to you because obviously your free product is your podcasts and video series, whereas your paid product is an actual software product. So it's more obvious there. But people who have, for instance, like paid newsletters, their natural inclination is to make the paid newsletter look just like the free newsletter. And I don't think a lot of people actually want to pay for one more extra of what they're already receiving for free. So you got to think about what kind of iterative value can you add on the paid product versus the free product. In my case, the paid product are these case study interviews, these kind of evergreen long form interviews where people could actually go and peruse through my archives and find like relevant stuff going back months or even years. Whereas my regular free newsletter is a little bit more tied to the news cycle and what's going on that week or that month. And so it has less long-term evergreen value. So that's the kind of thinking you have to consider when you're weighing what do I put in front of the paywall versus what do I put behind the paywall.
I think that's key when it comes to finding that balance, and I think that trajectory that you mentioned of seeing growth, I think that's the most important and honest data metric to know, are we acquiring, followers? Are we building our brand up? And then is that resulting in conversions? Those two metrics have to be connected. One of them can't be off from the other one. They have to be total partners. So I think that's really, really interesting. If you could please give us sort of a tactical path on how we can create our email newsletter. Now, what's the tech that you might suggest for us? What is sort of a schedule that you might do? Maybe something, obviously it's going to be different for each and every person, but maybe what your process is, what tech and what your calendar looks like.
Well, let's talk about the calendar first, because I think this is a big mistake a lot of people do is they say, okay, we're going to send out a newsletter once a month. But think about the person who subscribes to your newsletter. Let's say your newsletter goes out the first of every month and someone signs up for it on the 3rd of that month. So 2 days after you send out the newsletter, someone signs up to receive the newsletter. Then they have to wait 27 days before they see it again. And in the vast majority of cases, that person will forget that they even signed up for your newsletter or even who you are. And so when you receive it again, they have a very high likelihood either to send it to their spam folder or to unsubscribe, because they don't even realize that they signed up for the newsletter. Because that top of the funnel connection between when they were interested in your content and when you sent out the content was just too long. So you should be doing it on a cadence of at least every other week, if not at least once a week. So that's what you should be thinking about in terms of calendar. In terms of tech, depends on what your goals are. For me, I am mostly an editorial writer. The main thing that I offer is content. So I use Substack. Substack has its benefits because it's made for people like me who just want to do kind of one thing, and that's charge people to get access to more newsletters. But it doesn't have a lot of those kind of more souped up marketing capabilities that a more sophisticated email platform will have. It doesn't allow drip campaigns. It doesn't allow me to create segmented lists. It doesn't allow me to do A/B testing. For your platform, I'm assuming you have a couple different employees. I'm assuming you have a decent sized marketing budget. You might even have a full-time marketing person. In that case, you want to maybe to invest in a much more sophisticated marketing platform. Obviously, the most well-known is MailChimp, where you can do kind of more sophisticated type measuring to see where users are converting and tie it into your Google Analytics and really kind of do a data-driven approach to how that you're implementing email into your larger marketing apparatus.
Yeah, actually, since you mentioned it, the thing that we have been on a journey on for the last so many years now is really offering a video first content creation and sharing platform, and that's what we've been building. So we started out using third-party email tools, and then we just decided to build it all within Dubb. So now what I think makes Dubb a little bit different is that it's once you create a video, you can share that video on a one-to-one basis, Gmail, LinkedIn, but then you can also broadcast that to a large list of thousands or tens of thousands of folks. And I think what makes it a little bit different is that it is a video first strategy. Of course, video is not for everyone. You mentioned that you are more focused on editorial pieces. So, Dubb might not be appropriate for you, because if you're not putting out some sort of a video as your content, it's not going to work. But at the end of the day, what we've learned is that content and quality is what drives more interest. And I think that it's the hardest thing to do, because what I think most people do inherently is that their content is a little bit salesy, and a lot of people suffer from this. We hear it all the time that, hey, listen, my email open rates are not very good. My click rates are kind of terrible. What's going on? And then we'll take a look at some of the content. We'll notice, well, are you providing value, or are you just trying to sell something? Because if you're just trying to sell something, you're only really catering to 2 to 5% of your audience. Whereas if you're being educational, then it's much broader. Question for you: how do we find our balance with not being salesy in our content, and what type of things can we do to really get ourselves into that mindset of being customer centric, not sales centric?
Yeah, I mean, there should be hardly any sales at all. And I think that 80+% of your content should never hardly ever mention the company you work for, unless you're trying to share some teachings from what you're doing in your day-to-day life, then it might feel more natural. Like if you're writing kind of like a first-person essay or podcast or video about something that you learned, through the process of running your company, and except in those cases, you really shouldn't have much content at all around your company. Like you do need to have landing pages so that like maybe at the end of the content, you can then, explain, like have the tie-in. For instance, in my podcast, my average podcast episode is anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes long. I spend about 60 seconds of every single podcast talking about my paid newsletter. So you could, whatever that math is, the ratio of me just trying to create good content and insights and deliver those versus me just talking about the product I'm selling, there's no comparison. And I think just about every brand should be doing this. And this is always the struggle of the content marketer, is to kind of get them to relinquish the sales process and just trust that if you provide value, that a certain percentage of your more loyal followers will go to explore your product and learn more about it and can convert further down the line.
Well, the math I did real quick was 5 to 10%. So 5% at the minimum is what you might spend on focusing on saying sales focus. So 90 to 95% is value focused, entertainment focused. That's a great metric. I think that we all need to live by that. We all need to remind ourselves of that. The next time folks are putting together a podcast or an email newsletter or a video, they need to think what Simon said, that 5 to 10% should be kind of sales focused in an eloquent way, obviously non pushy, and the rest is obviously on value.
And that's not to say that you can't have direct sales. Like I'm sure you buy, for instance, Google AdWords for people who are Googling, video creation software or something like that. In that case, that's someone specifically looking for your kind of product. And in that case, obviously, you want to make the more direct sale. But this is strictly speaking in terms of content marketing.
That makes sense. So it's folks that are higher in the ecosystem that aren't necessarily at some decision stage, and they're just learning. Right? That's cool. That makes total sense to me. Speaking of your content, where can we learn more about you? What's the name of your podcast? Website?
Mm-hmm. So the podcast is The Business of Content. So you can find that wherever you get your podcast. The newsletter, a lot of times I just tell people to Google Simon Owens newsletter. I like that because when they Google that and people click on the newsletter, it's telling Google that it has a lot of value to readers. But you can also just go to simonowens.substack.com.
Nice, very cool. So that makes total sense. Substack is the platform that you're using, and then Substack is taking care of. Does that take care of the free newsletter and then also the paid one, or is it just the paid?
Yep, it's an all-in-one platform. That's what's so great about it.
Amazing. Well, this was enlightening, man. I really appreciate your time, Simon. Thank you so much for this.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
See you, man. Take care.
Thanks.